for the winter storm relief. I know how bad it was, and I hope everyone has felt some relief already. All right, let's move on to the logistics of today's live show. We've got viewers today on the BlueJeans Live Events platform and on YouTube Live. If you're watching on the BlueJeans Live Events platform, we have some fun interactives for you. On the right-hand side, you'll find navigation tools. The first icon is the presenter list, so you can see who's here today. The second icon is the event chat, which I think should get going now. So all my people on BlueJeans Live Events, let me know where you're watching from and what your favorite TV show is. The third icon we have is the moderator chat. And if you're having any technical difficulties at all, Maggie, our moderator, is standing by ready to help. The fourth icon is our poll icon, and you'll see a couple of polls pop out throughout the show. And finally, we have our Q&A icon. And if you have any questions for Sam, Jim, or Ben, submit them here, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session. All right, I think my 15 minutes of fame are up. Without further ado, take it away, Sam and Jim.
Thanks, JR. We're going to start by saying we're excited to be using BlueJeans Events here at South by Southwest. We're excited to be at South by Southwest. And Jim and I actually used BlueJeans when we worked on Daredevil Season 3 for Marvel, when we did production in New York, and it worked really well. We did not know that video calls were going to take over the planet, but we get to feel like we were ahead of the ball a little bit with BlueJeans then.
Yeah, it worked really great for us. And BlueJeans Events has a ton of engagement tools. For example, as JR was talking about polling, and we're going to have those polls up for you to vote on during the podcast today, so check that out. We also have a live chat feature. You can interact with each other and our amazing producers, JR and Maggie, who have worked very hard to put all this together.
And the BlueJeans platform also lets us do live Q&A, which we don't get to do on our regular podcasts, so put your questions in there too. You know, I was thinking that doing live podcasts is exactly everything that I did not want to do because I'm a writer, you're a writer, and I'm used to rewriting everything and making it perfect before everyone sees it. And instead, it's like, oh no, here I am screwing up right and left,
on camera,
which is very uncomfortable. But BlueJeans is a great way for content creators to interact with their audiences, which is why that we do this actually, and to build their fan bases. And you can use it for live podcasts like we're doing, and you can use it for promotional events, creative sessions, and you can have production calls with people in New York, 40 people at a time, which is what we did in the past on Daredevil.
And to make it easier to do all of those things, BlueJeans has given our listeners and today's attendees a discount code for the platform. 20% off on BlueJeans Events until April 16th. If you go and look, you'll check out the link in the comments or head to the virtual booth to get the code and the link.
So also BlueJeans is giving away something that I don't really know what it is. It's a Blackmagic ATEM mini switchboard. But I know it's free, and I know they're giving it away, so we have to have it because we're Americans. We want to gather as many items as we can before we die. So if you want to enter to win, head to their virtual booth, fill out the form, and enter your name into the drawing.
I think it's really about gathering up the free items, Sam. It's the free items. Okay, so with all of that taken care of, we want to welcome everyone to the Writers' Room with Sam and Jim. He's Sam. I'm Jim. This is the show where we bring in writers to our Writers' Room to help them work on and develop their stories. Usually we have on aspiring writers, but for South by Southwest, we brought in a special guest star.
That's right. We brought in one of our favorite writers in Hollywood, Ben Watkins. And I want to talk a little bit about Ben and tell everybody about him before we get into it. Ben is the creator and showrunner of a provocative Amazon show, to say the least, a series called Hand of God. And Jim and I worked for him on that show for 2 seasons. And what's so cool about Hand of God, besides all the stuff we can get into, is Jim and I watched the pilot, which Amazon used to put on the pilots before they even greenlit the show. And I watched it mostly because Ron Perlman was in it. And then I said to Jim, you got to check out this show. This is not like a normal television show. And
little did we know how not like a normal TV show it was.
Yeah, and how not normal the man who created it was. But we both really liked the show, and then it went away. We waited. We didn't know anything about it. We went and worked on other stuff, and then we got a call from Amazon saying, "Hey, would you be interested in this show?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize that was being made. I didn't know anything about it." And we met and met with Ben. Now, Ben most recently executive produced Truth Be Told on Apple's new streaming service. and he also worked on Wu-Tang and American Saga for Hulu. Currently has several projects in development through his production company, which is Blue Monday Productions, which is at Amazon Studios. And in his free time, Candy, who we think is real, because she does not love Hollywood, and so she avoids everything as much as possible, and his 4 sons, who we know are real because they are 4 well-behaved young men. They work in community programs, and they do all that important stuff. Ben's always been a mentor to young writers of color, who works in public education and homelessness. So welcome, Ben, and thanks for wasting some time with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so Ben is an actor, so he is not completely embarrassed to hear all those good things about him because he has that. That's right. Give you more. That's right.
He's on Young and the Restless.
Well, that's right. I did. It was Young and the Restless.
I was talking about the Sting.
Yes. Ben actually is a recovering actor, which is why. Anyway, that doesn't matter. But I want to ask you a question. First question I want to ask you is, what we do on this show and what we're going to do with Ben is later on we have JR has come up with a log line, and we are going to break the story, as we call it, in the writer's room. We're going to start beating out the story as if we were developing a pilot. And we have actually developed a pilot with Ben before, and we sold it to FX, and unfortunately it didn't go to series, but we have broken hours and hours and hours of Ben's ideas, and then and our ideas for Ben shows, and then also our ideas for the show that we came up with together called Train Hoppers. And we're going to do that so that people can see in what we think is so important for aspiring writers, and what was so great for us when we started out was watching writers who'd done it for 10,000, 20,000 hours and how they approach the story, and you get to see it. And it helps so much in a different way than reading it in a book. But you're a showrunner, Ben, and you hire writers. And a lot of the people that listen to our podcast are aspiring writers. And so I'm going to ask you, when you get a script and you get it from an aspiring writer, first of all, how do you look at it differently than you do a senior writer script? And then what are you looking for in that script?
Oh, man, that's a great question about the difference between what my expectations might be if I was getting a script from, experienced writer with a long track record, or a script from an aspiring writer. And I think it's funny because I would say there are some things that I would give, I'll give more of a pass to if I know it's an aspiring writer. Sort of some of the things that polished writers are able to do in their sleep that aspiring writers might not know, just because they haven't been doing this for executives long enough, for buyers long enough. And so there are certain things about polish or structure that I might forgive in an aspiring writer's script. But on the other hand, there are some things I want more out of an aspiring writer's script that I might not demand as much from a polished writer. And that is this voice, right? I gotta know. I need that writer to really define themselves and introduce themselves through that script, and how they write action, how they write description, how they write character description, obviously dialogue, and then obviously what the story is about. If I put it like this, if I feel like this writer is inspired, I'm okay with a logic bump. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I'm really looking for. You got to get my attention. Let me know that you're an inspired writer.
Now, so it seems like almost an impossible balance. So you have to put together something that makes sense, but you also want to have your own flash. Which, by the way, when you say voice, what does that What does that mean to you?
For me, that means point of view, like strong point of view and specific, authentic, like translation of life's moments, of people moments. You know what I mean? So if you talk to me about, like, if it's like, think of anything that could happen in your life, an argument between, when you're a kid, you witness an argument between your parents, right? And all the screaming and yelling is dramatic and it's scary, but when they stop yelling and the mom says something real quiet, just completely guts the dad. That's right.
Right.
And if you can tap into that and show that you have a proclivity for observing that type of thing, let's say you saw a car crash and you know, there's gore, there's twisted metal, there's lights all over the ground, there's sirens in the distance, but what stuck with you was a little kid's teddy bear that got thrown from the car and is sitting in the middle of the street. That's so, and that tells me you have a POV. That tells me you can center in on things that are really going to get people emotionally, because anybody can describe a car crash, but you need to have a POV on like when you came away from that experience, what really stuck. And then people will tap into that. They don't have to have the same experience as you, but they can relate to your experience if you're specific.
Yeah, that's so true. And when you get a script from a junior writer, one that's already got a job, sometimes, and I think that you could speak to this, sometimes you almost have to talk to them ahead of time and say, don't be afraid to go to diverge from what is here a little bit. Only because if they're writing it too tight, they're only going to give you an average version of whatever it is you have. Yeah. Whereas it'll never be that. And I'll say this, Jim and I were blown away. And I don't know if you still do this. You might have realized that this is a crazy thing to do. But we loved it, which was we came on the show, Hand of God, mid-season, and the first thing you did was give us each, because we wrote separately and we still do, but scenes, and said, I just wrote these scenes. Could you rewrite them?
And it was like the showrunner wants us to rewrite his scenes on the first day. Okay, this is going to be a very short job.
Yeah. And I don't know how that worked out, but I know that you want to hold back. And then what we learned over time was you did not want us to hold back. You're like, take it in a completely different direction, because if I don't like it, I'll toss it and I'll go back to what I have. I didn't delete my file. But maybe something will happen when you are doing your thing that then I can be like, that's the money. And that's your phrase. The cash value in the scene, to use a Ben Watkins-ism, is right there. And I didn't see it, but Sam did, or Jim did, or whoever. And so I'm going to throw away all that other stuff, but that thing I never would have found on my own. And now I'm going to take that and I'm going to write using that. And now we just found the scene. And that's, is that a fair estimation of your process, how you do it?
Yeah. I mean, when we get involved, especially a writer's room, it's all about collaboration. So my thing is, the way I describe it is, you shouldn't be executing someone's vision in the writer's room. You should be expanding it. Right.
Yeah.
And so you got to give people reign to take swings and take real swings and be ambitious and then take risks. And one of the reasons for that is like you're going to get some magic from them, but also you're going to get what's special about them. You're not going to get them reenacting Ben Watkins. You're not going to get them reenacting Sam and Jim. You're going to get them putting their spin on it, and that's going to make your show better and your story better. And ultimately your job easier. And it's, we all know how hard the job is. So
that's the most important thing.
Those unexpected pieces that add something special to it. So going off of the question Sam asked, what was your first script that got you a job in Hollywood? And what was that job?
Well, I mean, so there's two versions to that story, because there's the first script that really like cemented my transition from being an actor to a writer. And then there's the first script that got me into television. And the first one, is so funny because when I moved to LA, I've been married for almost 30 years, right? In fact, it'll be 29 years in June. And so I was married when I came to LA, even when I started talking about coming to LA as an actor. And I actually, my wife, when we first started planning, we had one kid and she was pregnant with our second kid.
This is a terrible idea, by the way.
Candy is so much better than you deserve, man.
Definitely.
I'm this struggling actor with these big dreams, and I'm like, babe, I can't, really make these dreams unless I get to LA. And she wants me to have these dreams, but on the same hand, she's like, so you just want to uproot the family, move to LA on a pipe dream. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. And, so we made a deal. The first one was that we would wait until our youngest was 1 year old. You know what I mean? Because it's so much easier when you have two kids and one's one. And, second deal, the second piece of the deal was that we would only stay for a year. And we were so blissfully naive. I heard Tamara talk about that too. Like just being blissfully naive about the business helps you. I know you guys had the same thing. It's like, so you take risks without really knowing how daunting this journey is going to be. And I actually thought I was going to be this huge star after a year. I was like, it'll take me less than a year to be a huge star. So that's an easy deal to make. So the deal was move to LA for a year. If I'm not a big star, by the end of that year, we move back and I go get a sensible career. And the first year we got to LA, I was booking all these jobs as a guest spots as an actor in Hollywood, going great. And so by the end of that year, I wasn't a big star, but it was definitely enough that I was able to like get that second year, right? So
a friend of ours, a showrunner, said this is a business where you can die of encouragement.
Right.
Yeah. It's great. Keep going.
And even more things, you're like, wait a minute, that second. So I got the second year option got exercised, and so we're in LA, and the second year was crickets. It was wasteland, and again, now this is the part where the naivete wasn't so good. I actually screen tested for 4 different series that year and didn't get the part, and I thought that was it, and I didn't even realize screen testing was such a big deal. And like that meant you were actually about to break through. I just knew I didn't get these roles and I didn't book anything. I think I booked like one little small thing. So at that point we started making plans to go back to the Bay Area where we were from, Northern California. And like real plans. Like I was gonna like start applying to law school or like go, a master's program for education or something. And we were starting to look at taking our jobs and moving them back to the Bay Area. And since that was going to be a process of actually getting ready to move back to Northern California, my wife says, well, it's going to take a minute anyway. Why don't you do that short film that you've been talking about? And then you'll have something to remember LA by. And I was like, okay, cool. Back to being blissfully naive. I wrote a script. It was terrible. I shared it with some people. And they said, the premise is okay, but the script's terrible. Let me share it with a writer. And the writer got coffee with me, bless his heart. His name was James Crite. And the first thing he said is, you could tell an actor wrote it. He said, here that would be fun to act, but there's no story. And so then he walked me through and pointed me in the right direction. I actually got that script into a good place. And kept churning, not knowing how crazy it is to be trying to make a short film with no money and that will never make money. And eventually I got pieces in place and a script that worked, and I made this short film. And the short film, which was supposed to be sort of a goodbye love note to Hollywood, ended up getting in all these festivals, and I was starring in it. And a casting director of a soap opera who was aware of me but thought I was too young for a role that they were looking at. After they saw the short, they were like, well, wait a minute, maybe there's something more here. And they actually convinced their executive producer to change the age of a role they were casting. And that short film got me a regular gig on The Young and the Restless.
Oh, there you go. So Candy was right.
Yeah.
Again.
Yep. She was right. None of this.
Don't tell her I said that.
And she, it's like I have, some people, you got to have somebody there to support you or be crazy with you or whatever it is. Like you have to build that into your life. I was lucky enough that was my wife, but everybody needs a little bit of that. And if you're solo, you better come up with an alter ego who can talk you down when you're freaking out or cheer you up when you're in the lows. But that script, so that gig, with that Young and the Restless gig, I bought the first house in LA. We got our first house, and I always joke because my first real acting gig got me a house in LA, and the first script I sold got that house out of foreclosure.
That's a good line.
Yeah. While I was on the soap, I started realizing I liked writing more than acting, and my contract was up for renewal. I actually passed, thinking that I was supposed to focus on writing. But again, I was like, oh, I'm about to hit it rich as a writer. And then I had like a 2-year stretch where it was desperation. But during that 2-year stretch, I adapted the short film into a feature-length script, and that sold to Universal with Chris Tucker attached. That's a long story. It never got made. It was all crazy.
Right. Most things never get made.
That got me an agent. That got us enough money to stay in LA, get the house out of foreclosure, all of that. And the follow-up against everyone's recommendations was a pilot. And everybody's kept saying you need to write another feature and it needs to be in the same category because that's how you made your first class. And you're not in a situation where you get to depart. You don't get to just all of this. And I said, but this idea I have is really open-ended and multiple seasons, so it's not a feature. You better figure something out. And I was like, I'm going to write what is passionate for me at this time. Yeah. And that was the pilot. And I wrote a pilot called The Hooker, which was it sounds salacious, but it's actually about a ambitious young college basketball coach who's a prime recruiter, like one of the best there is. And that's what they call, these recruiters, hookers, right? They hook the big fish. And that pilot didn't get made, but has, to this day, I hear people reach out to me about that. That became my bulletproof sample. I'm always telling people, get yourself a bulletproof sample. It will never stop for you. And somehow it got into the hands of the people who were getting ready to put a writing room together for Burn Notice, completely unbeknownst to me. So that is the script that got me in the door. And it's so funny because the executive I guess it was it Fox 21 back in the, no, what was it called? Oh, Fox TV Studios back in the day. The executive telling me, hey man, I got this pilot. It's great, but I can't recommend you off of one script. Do you have a spec? And I was like, and I'm like, yeah, I got a spec. And he's like, well, send me that. Y'all know it's not a fluke. And then I left out of there and I called my agent. I was like, what's a spec? Like a sample episode of an existing TV show, and I had to write that in less than a week in order to get sounding crazy. And luckily, it was decent enough that he knew the first script wasn't fluke, and he put me in mix for Burn Notice, and that started my career for TV.
And you went from staff writer on Burn Notice all the way up to executive producer on Burn Notice for everybody that doesn't know that. And so that worked.
Yeah. I got my PhD there, and I happened to land on a show with a showrunner who wasn't from TV, so he was super egalitarian. He was like, best idea wins, and whatever talent you can find, no matter what level they are. So he didn't really abide by the hierarchy, which back then was, really, in writers' rooms, the hierarchy really ruled in most places. But now people, I think, are a little more open to like, best idea wins, and you should really access the talent that's there regardless of what their official title is.
Yeah, every room we've worked in has been that way, and that's been great. Definitely true in your room. Before we go to the log line, I just want to point out that your first script was Hooker, and Matt Nix, who was the showrunner of Burn Notice, his script that got him a splash was Cock. And so clearly...
Which everyone wanted to read just to find out what was in that script.
What was in that script. So... Here we are naming our scripts. Like, why do we not name our script? I don't want to say those words because I get in big trouble.
Man, I never thought about it, but it's dawning on me. Like the times I walked in, to rooms to pitch the Hooker, and people were like, "I'm a little disappointed," and now I realize.
Yeah.
That's right. This is going to be.
It'll get you in the room, but it changes the expectations.
All right, so we're going to jump into the part where we actually start breaking story, and what we do for this part is usually on our show, aspiring writers or even established writers, they come on the show, they tell us their idea, and then we spend a half an hour completely screwing them up. But at least looking at how we do it, how we approach it, all that stuff. But it's news to us, and so when it's a professional writer coming in, or whatever it is you are, Ben, we had JR write an idea, and it's a little long, and he put it on this card, so we haven't seen it either. So this is news to us.
Okay? This
Drum roll, please.
So much pressure, bro. You know what I'm saying?
It does feel like pressure, except
you're right. you know, some days you go into the room and you go cold, right? Like you just don't pitch one idea. And then like, who is this dude, this professional? How did he ever get a job? And how
Ben, we're going to sell this in the room. We're going to get a call from a studio before the show's over.
I know. It's going to be created by JR because he came up with the idea.
That's right. But don't worry, we'll squeeze him out.
Yeah, we'll squeeze him out fast. No problem.
baby.
You know, we say this on the podcast all the time. You can't be afraid to suck, right? That's the number one rule in a writer's room. And I remember I was on Hand of God for like 2 weeks, and I went into the room. And for those who haven't seen Hand of God, I don't want to give the whole thing, but there's people who believe that that they believe in God and they believe Ron Perlman has spoken to God, and then there are the people who don't, and then some in the middle. And the thing is, and so I said we were pitching, and I had this crazy idea, and I didn't know any of the writers in this room. I knew Ben. The other two writers hadn't been around; they've been producing episodes, and I didn't know them, and Jim wasn't around. And I'm like, here I am with people I don't know, and we're trying to come up with what's the core of this episode. And I said, what if it was if it was kind of like the cheerleaders versus the football players in this way? It's the religious people praying in the hospital, and they're trying to stop everybody from the non-religious people from turning off the machine, and it's all a battle between them in the hospital. And I said, I know that's the worst pitch I've ever done, but I feel like there's something in there. And then there's the pause, right? And then you're just waiting for the judgment of the other writers who you don't know. Yeah. But the good thing is you brought in people who all know the number one rule is don't be afraid to suck. And so they all thought about it for a minute, and they're like, no, I think that's it. And then they took that and made it good. Right, and that's what the room does. And I think that was before we even pitched to you. It was just sort of like a little. So, don't be afraid to suck, Ben. That's what I'm telling you.
Oh, okay. I'm ready. I'm good at that.
Yeah. All right. Status-obsessed art dealer for the wealthy is tasked by his newest client with finding out the truth behind the rumors of a forbidden collector's item, that one of the murder weapons of a serial killer who's uncaught is in there. When he discovers this urban legend of the upper crust to be real, the art dealer finds himself in a dangerous world of macabre collectors with powerful friends and deep pockets. His only lifeline out of this is that a young and reckless detective is looking to make a name for herself by catching the serial killer. All right. I don't remember the first sentence that I said by the time I got to the last sentence that I read.
That was a very circuitous, long line.
Okay. So who wants to start?
So there's a piece of art that has a murder weapon hidden in it that this detective needs that will help them find a serial killer, and this is all taking place in the world of wealthy art collectors.
Right. Okay. And all right, so we have to simplify it. And by the way, Ben, do you find this to be true? The more you write, the simpler everything gets.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Because all the plot stuff is the simplest stuff, and then if you have good characters, they're going to make it complicated in an emotional way because that's what human beings do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And when you're a veteran, you know you can do the other stuff. You know you can do flavor. Yeah. You know you can do twist. You know you can do building out character specifics. So you're okay focusing on something very pure and streamlined and simple to begin with. But when you're starting out, like that's all that stuff that becomes second nature. That's the stuff that's going to set you apart, and you really got to focus on that more. The only danger is you could be focusing on that to the detriment of the story.
Right.
Well, like in this thing, right? It seems like the first piece is this detective wants to find the serial killer. Why? Like, what's the emotion in the story? She's obviously driven to catch the serial killer. What happened? Did she lose someone? Did she not catch another serial killer? What's her motivation?
Right. And I think that's the down the middle question, right? Like the question of why she wants is not the down the middle. That's the most important one. But the answer of she didn't catch one before, that's the one where we're like, okay, there's that one. Let's move right past that, right?
But that also brings me to, so the first character in the log line is this art dealer.
Right.
So that's who I would be like, okay, let's get that motivation let's get a connection. They might not even be aware of the connection, but let's make sure there's a connection that's going to give them a vested interest and some stakes in this situation. Because detective, even if it's not personal, that's their job. So you get the advantage of that. But of course we want to make it personal. But the art dealer, I'm like, why would they care other than it's like a curious fact? And the other big question for me, well, we gotta agree: is this serial killer alive or dead? Is it somebody who's alive and active, or is it somebody like Jack the Ripper who's never been conclusively identified, and we're going to be the ones who identify him? It's going to have major ripple effects in present day.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
I think we do need a living serial killer, or don't need it. The antagonist could be who's ever trying to get this ahead of us. But if we want it ongoing,
or someone with a vested interest in the serial killer not being found.
that could be, and that's that's true. And we could have both, by the way.
Right.
But I wonder if the twist on the serial killer isn't that he's still alive. It's that because the art dealer is going after it, or because there's an urban legend, somebody finds out about this, someone who has certain proclivities, say, and decides to become the serial killer because of what is happening in the show, right? It's almost like, like maybe someone that works for them. Like the serial killer is not real. They realize it's not real. They know it's not real. And then something happens and we're like, oh, shit, it's real.
It's the superhero theory, right? Because Batman exists, he creates the Joker because there's someone who wants to fill that role, right? Like it's a trigger for a damaged personality.
What do you think, Ben? No pressure.
I feel like you got to have.
We can go.
All right, I'm not sure if I'm riffing or not, or pulling threads, but I feel like we need this killer to be. It's either the killer's alive and active, the actual serial killer whose weapon is in that thing, and then we need to make sure that was a mistake, right? That was a thing that, it's like killers aren't trying to get caught, but they might do something they thought was clever, like hide a murder weapon in a fine piece of art, and they might get off on that because then they're like, fine piece of art is going to be in some rich person's house or it's going to be in some fancy museum, and people are going to be walking by it daily, and they're going to be seen, and they'll never know that the dagger that did this or the gun that it, there's that, and then they're active, and then now there's more stakes because other people are still dying, but now when they realize somebody's on their trail, then we could have the shape, we're the hunters, but the prey could turn on us.
I love that.
It's sort of an interesting turn on the idea of killers taking trophies.
Right.
Like he's making trophies out of fine works of art.
And he's in the audience while everyone's walking past and looking at his trophy, but they don't realize it's his trophy. Is that what you said, Ben?
Oh, yeah.
Voyeuristic.
That's fantastic. And then he's like this dude who operates in this world, and he did the math. He was like, what lasts forever? Art and tickets.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay. I got a pitch for you then. So then the question is, and I got a couple things, but here's a pitch and a question. Pitch is, how do we get the piece out of and how do we get the art collector involved, and how do we get the piece out of the museum?
Yeah.
One version, the shitty version, is the art collector. We start out, the first scene is he's meeting with Mr. and Mrs. Abramowitz. And Mrs. Abramowitz, or her mother, went through Dachau, and all of her stuff was taken and was stolen from the family. And now they're suing this museum. And they get the artwork back. And that's his victory. But in doing that, it unfortunately unleashes all these knock-on effects that he had no. It's the good act that has all these unintended consequences. Yeah. Right? That's one version.
So this is a guy that's going to make our art dealer, that's going to give us some immediate rooting interest for this guy. This is a dude who has become a specialist in recovering items that were gotten through ill means. And that could be Holocaust survivors. That could also be people, from the Congo who were looted. It could also be Black Americans who, had something, got it completely taken away during a riot. I mean, there's so many different options,
That's
but
already better than the
right.
That makes us care about him, right? Then
so that's rooting interest. Just to identify it, that's rooting interest in your protagonist.
Right.
If you can do that in the first X number of minutes of your pilot, that's fantastic. Ironically, on the last pilot Jim and I wrote, we wrote this beautiful space thing with zero rooting interest for the guy in the first. And the first note we got from our agent is, God, I wish I cared about this guy first, because we wanted to unpeel the layers.
We were doing kind of a psychological drama, and they were like, oh, but we got to care about him first. Of course we have to care about him first.
Yeah.
Right.
There's another, this would be fun. Like I also am like, okay, so then you get that rooting interest, then you also want to have, like, you got to have two pieces that are going to be pushing on your protagonist. So she's an art dealer who champions the underdogs and gets their stuff back that should rightfully be theirs. Then she's up against all of these rich people who don't want to admit that they've done wrong or don't want to lose something so valuable. So she's up against the establishment. That's great. All right. But you got that external pressure. But we all know you also got to have some sort of internal pressure, like what's her issue, right?
Right.
Now, if somebody you want to fuck with, it could be, oh, we think he's a champion for the underdog, but it's really he just found a nice little in that's easy. He's still all about getting that commission. He's still all about getting that money.
Right.
This will be a learning experience for him because he'll have to get a more altruistic view on life. Or if it's, or she has some other thing, like the easiest one to do is like an addiction or something she could be blackmailed for, or some other thing that happens where it's like there's an internal obstacle that she's gonna have to uncover. And the reason we always be like, hey, get the internal one. That's the one that gives legs to a series.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Change throughout, but the internal one is the one that gives legs to a series.
That's right. And I love the fact that you're dirtying him up right away. Now, we don't have, all right, yeah, we got the rooting interest and he's great, but we don't want to make him perfect because, number one, that's boring. It's not 1975. We're not making, perfect. We don't want the perfect, strong white male to be the lead. And then, here comes a woman and she's got confidence issues, or, it's all that junk. Yeah. We don't want that.
It might not be a strong white male. Did we land on that?
No. What I'm saying is we don't want that.
That stuff,
don't do that. We want to dirty him up not only in his motivation, and by the way, I want to point out, what's that?
Maybe that's the first change we make. Maybe it's a woman.
Maybe. And for that matter, I want to point out that, and this is why it's important to get lots of different kinds of people in a room. I'm Jewish, so I went right to, well, how do you steal art from people? Oh, that's Nazis and Jews. But you're a writer of color, and you're like, well, could be African Americans, could be someone from Africa. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care what the thing is. In fact, except I do, because I've already seen the story of.
Yeah.
Right. You want the new stories you haven't seen.
It's a great point. I do think that Holocaust survivors is great. I think that still fits. I think it opens us up to a lot of different worlds we can play with, but I like that. Holocaust.
I'm arguing the other way, though. I'm going the other way. I'm saying I've already seen that story on television a lot. That's where I went because my Aunt Dora had a number on her arm. So that's where I go to because of my perspective, not because I think it's better.
The best story you
No,
thought
I was
of
just like, that's how stuff is taken, and it's emotional and it's all that. And then you said, yeah, there's other ways to do that, get that same emotion. And I'm like, yeah, and I haven't seen those, so let's do that. And I'm just trying to point out that's how that different perspective thing. I could have come up with Chad or Congo rather, but I didn't, did I?
Yeah.
So because I went to my own pain.
Yeah, right.
That I grew up with. Now let me ask you. Let me switch gears just for a minute. And have you
Indiana?
That's what art? It's like that Ronco thing where you cut the wine bottle in half and you make glasses out of the bottom of the wine bottle. The collection of those, I think.
There are a lot of great artists from Indiana. They all live in New York City. Okay. Ben, let me ask you. This is a big question, a big fork in the road, and if you could talk about different ideas you have for this, which is point of view. So, whose point of view is this show in? Because right now I'm seeing three characters, right? We got the art dealer, male or female. We got the cop, male or female, and we got possibly the serial killer, and then whomever else. So how would you? What are like different ways we might go about POV?
Yeah, I'm gonna just stick to the log line on this one and say that we gotta have the driving force be the art dealer, and that doesn't actually feel like the most natural way in to me. So that also means there's a potential opportunity there, because the easiest way in something like what just got described is like you're going through this obsessed detective, you know what I mean, who may have had to quit their job in order to follow through on this, or is definitely going to run afoul of the establishment. But that detective sounds like the easiest way in, also because they're driving some of the things you need, being the plot points, history,
uncovering secrets.
Yeah, but if it's the art dealer, that's fun because then you get an opportunity. Why does this become a driving force for them? And then once it is, then they're fish out of water. And I love like Robert Redford in 3 Days of the Condor. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Fish out of water. You get a character. She's completely foreign to this world and everything she's about to have to do. And yet there's something in her DNA that makes her capable of pulling it off.
Right. No, and well, let me break out another thing in terms of point of view and something that is relatively new, right? Although I just watched Silence of the Lambs the other night and they did it there, but when you're in the serial killer point of view for part of it, which they did for The Fall, which was, I don't know if you saw the Gillian Anderson,
Killing Eve,
Killing Eve, show. But when you're in their point of view, I mean, it's creepy as fuck. And the thing that's so great about that is then you switch out of that to the art dealer who lives a normal life, or even if not so normal, but not, with, dead bodies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It freaks you out.
Yep.
And I write scary stuff for a living, but I still get scared. I think that's why I write it. I mean, I have to pause stuff while I'm watching it and leave the room sometimes. Ask Jim. And then
I was thinking how I still have not finished The Witch.
Right, because
I'm like three-quarters of the way through, and I just can't get to the end of that movie. It just scares me too much.
Right, and I think that's true for a lot of writers that I know, because we do this thing that affects us so much. So, point of view for the serial killer, could we do that?
I think we have
entirely.
You're talking about somebody who's active, and still killing people, and then they're going to want to kill our hero as well.
That's right.
That's so. I mean, it's interesting. It's scary, and it also helps you establish what the hero's up against. Like they're up against the unknown, but they're also up against somebody who's way better at this game than them.
Right.
And the stakes are it heightens the stakes, because the more the serial killer scares us, the more we want our hero to win this. But I also want to say this feels like a limited series to me, and that's a I don't know if that's what JR was intending, but any writer who's thinking about developing a show, and hey, you might say I want it to be a limited series, but that needs to be a conscious decision, because the reason it feels limited is because once you catch the person, that's the end of your show, and if you get beyond a season chasing the same person, that's also the end of your show, because people are going to
get an unplanned ending.
Although I will say it's interesting, Killing Eve is a great example of a show where they, by giving us the point of view of both the killer and the person chasing the killer, they managed to turn it into a relationship between the two of them that just keeps going and turning and turning. It's going to hit bottom at some point. You can only do that for so long, but they're getting multiple seasons out of it anyway.
Yeah. The thing, all right, so let's get it. We've talked now. We haven't identified exactly what the motivation of the cop is or the motivation of the art dealer. But another thing that we should talk about, only because we're not in a room, and we could talk about this for hours, and we have, but is what's the relationship between the cop and the art dealer? And so what are you going to be looking for, Ben, when we talk about that relationship?
One of the things, and this is slightly tied to motivation for the protagonist, but when you nail down protagonist motivation and then a little bit of the flaws, the first, and I'm really like, what is their goal? When you get that defined, and this one's probably pretty easy, right? I got the external goal of wanting to find this serial killer down the road, right? Like that's ultimately what's going to be. And then I'm going to have some internal one, like what do I have to conquer about myself? Is it my fear, my addiction, my past where I was a shit person? Whatever it is, now I get it, because then I start looking for what I call the natural allies and natural antagonists, right?
Right.
The natural antagonists, like, for example, if my protagonist is 17 and their whole life is dedicated to moving out of the house, I don't have to finish that sentence before you already know who's the natural antagonist.
Right.
So, at the same time, you can start thinking about natural allies, like that they probably have a girlfriend or they probably have an older sibling who's telling whatever, right? So, and the other reason I'm really big on that is those people, once they get established, they have to be established in a way where that dynamic can change.
Right.
And I pitch it in a way where you could see the potential for that change. So like when you ask that question, Sam, I'm already thinking we should make that detective a natural antagonist to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I do what that detective says, if I trust a detective who's telling me to rip open a Monet that's worth $18 million on the chance that there's some thing in there, I'm gonna lose $5 million and whatever. You're already an antagonist. So, but if they're right, you can see how that changes and they become an ally, even if it's a reluctant ally.
Right. And to bang on something you were saying, the allies, right? The people that that let's say our art dealer goes to and that he loves or trusts or has a relationship with, and they're now when the serial killer starts looking at them, right? Not at the art dealer, because I know he's not going to kill the art dealer.
Right.
But I don't know if he's going to kill the allies. And the truth is, most likely he is, because that's going to motivate or affect my lead, who I have an emotional connection with, and it's really going to hurt.
Yep.
So, and Ben, on Hand of God, you were kind of the king of trying to make people hurt because it makes people care, and you get a reaction, and you hopefully are second guessing everything that you think.
Yes.
When that happens, and that keeps them engaged, which is why you were saying, well, we gotta wrap up the serial killer thing at least a season, Jim's exception notwithstanding, because how long am I going to care about this?
Yeah.
Right.
And think about this for a second, like Jim's thing about the potential pivot, right? This is what would excite me, because then you start talking about that is a real long bridge to cross, to get a serial killer who's hiding their shit and it's an active serial killer hiding their shit in fancy art. They're already rich. That pisses me off. They're killing people. That pisses me off. They're still acting, all that. If you think that there's a chance that you could pivot them so that somehow in season 2, they're actually joining forces against some sort of common enemy we haven't established yet, that's a high bar, bro. And that's not almost impossible, but if you accomplish it, now you're special, right?
Yep.
And that's what people, that have to do. And like, I'm always like, here's what we're doing, right? When I'm talking to young writers, like when you get to a point, and this is the advantage of having audiences that are so literate nowadays. They are so literate on story and don't even know it. So they can start filling in the blanks very quickly. Even just off of how you shoot somebody, the camera angle. If you're doing a low angle shot and somebody's walking in the camera, they know that's a hero shot. They haven't heard any dialogue. They haven't been told. They already know.
100%.
So what does that leave us with? We're no longer in the business of satisfying expectations. They've already gotten past us. So my thing is, every time you're setting something up, you have to understand the bar is either you undermine the expectations or you exceed them. So if you land in that place that they were expecting, it has to be even better than what they were expecting. Otherwise, you got to undermine them. And you can't do that with an audience that's not literate. You can't undermine their expectations because they're not filling in blanks. That's 100%. What we have in this new landscape.
I watch television with my 12-year-old, with Lucinda, and she calls out shots. And that's not from me. I don't sit there and watch rough cuts with her, but we're watching things like The Crown, and she's already telling me, what they're doing with the camera, right? And that's because she's literate. It's just like you say, she's 12, let alone if you're 22 or 32. I mean, forget it. We just have consumed so much high-quality content now, and we just didn't before.
And it's funny, though, because I think one of the challenges is trusting that literacy in your audience. Like, it's always been, like, a writer's complaint has always been that the executives or whoever, is your audience for your script, they don't understand it. They don't trust it. They want it spelled out 2 or 3 times what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's one of those real dividing lines between, quote unquote, premium television and regular TV, if to use those terms, is you trust the audience or you don't. If you don't trust them and you're going to say everything 7 times, that's a certain kind of TV we know. Right. And then there's the one where you ask the audience to actually invest and pay attention and not be, folding their laundry while they're watching the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Killing Eve. That one does a great job of undermining expectations. I May Destroy You constantly undermining expectations and playing on, like, you just are like, oh, I get it. I see where we're headed with this. Oh, damn. I did not see that. And then
you're right.
Like Atlanta on a kind of casual show, on the half hour. I don't know if it's a comedy or a drama, but it does a great job of undermining expectations. Even you get there and you're like, okay, by episode 4, you realize that's the game we're in, but it's still, you can't game it. You can't predict it. And so, you have that advantage. If you got to lean into it.
That brings us full circle because this is about writers showing POV in their scripts, and that's why you want it, because in that moment you're showing intelligence of what's happening. Right. And if you know what's happening, if you know how to direct the moment to the most important, valuable part and have a new way to do it, I know as a writer when you turn in your pages, it may not be formatted perfectly, and there might be tricks that we can bring because we've done it a million times, but I know that there's going to be something in there new.
That is the single thing, right? Is when you read something, you're like, oh, I trust them. This writer knows what they're trying to make me experience, and they've succeeded in making me experience.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's clear too, because when we were reading scripts for Carnival Row, actually helping Eric Olson, the showrunner, we were going through the stack of submitted things. I pulled out one script, and Jim pulled out the same script. It wasn't subtle. It was we knew, we were like, this is the guy.
Yeah.
Out of this pile. All right. So now we're going to go to the question and answer. So thank you, everybody at JR. Just so you know, you can use whatever you want.
That show will be coming never to Hulu.
I'm going to use all of it if I can.
Yeah.
One season, JR.
It's a limited series. It's a limited series.
That used to be a bad word, but it's not anymore.
Yeah. No, I didn't want to cut you guys off for the Q&A because I was personally learning so much. I mean, that's the most fun I've had in a while. That was awesome.
It's a pandemic. Your standards will go up.
Yes, exactly. When you can see other people, it'll change.
Yeah, we'll see what happens when the bars open.
We didn't actually get a beat on the board, by the way. We
got no beats. That's true.
That's true.
I think
All right, so our first question is from Cody, and he says, what do you think could be more effective or advantageous? Building your audience so that they watch your indie film, or shooting your indie film to build your audience? And I guess this could apply to TV because there's stories like It's Always Sunny where they shot their pilot before they got any money. And so would you shoot something first or try to build an audience first?
How would you build an audience if you don't? I mean, how are you building an audience with little TikTok
Social
stuff?
Media?
What?
I would assume social media or getting hype around it before you shoot it. Maybe to crowdfund it.
I'm always gonna say make it. Even make
for you.
It'll make its own noise. If you make something good that people want to look at, the people will find it.
Yeah. Although I'm mixed on it, and I'll tell you why. When I know people have made their own stuff, and the problem is when the level playing field for every writer is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper looks the same when it's a script, and so and the budgets for those is exactly the same, which is it costs about $1 in paper, and it's a $15 million shooting budget, which you don't have to spend. But when you make a pilot, then you get distracted by, or you're making a movie or whatever, you get distracted by the performances. You're distracted by the production value, which is not going to be great unless that's built into the
all the
concept.
compromises that come in with, because collaboration is the good version, compromise is the bad version, right? Where you have to, sell off pieces of what you want to get the rest of it made.
The only thing I'll add to that is, like, let's assume you're writing scripts, so you're going to become a good writer, and the script becomes like the clincher. Sometimes to create momentum, or also if you have a unique voice that doesn't necessarily translate, then when you make stuff, even if it's a short film, it gives people a window. Now, sometimes all you need is for people to watch stuff, and it becomes a networking aspect, and it becomes sort of just another reason why they should pay attention to you. But it does come down to that fundamental thing. Once they pay attention to you, do you have a script?
Right.
That's
right. Right. That's 100%. Now, it's different if you're going to be a director. Then that's a whole different conversation. And I'll tell you the one thing. There are a lot of the reasons I like hanging out with writers, but my number one is it's pure. Right. Everybody, there's an idea. And then when you have writers who have written a lot, they can see down alleys and around corners. And even though the pitch sucked and you stuttered and your example sucked and all of that, they see past that, the good ones. And they don't focus on any of that. And they're looking for the good thing. And I love that on the page. And when it's a produced thing, to me, just speaking as a writer, with no aspirations to direct, by the way, I just love that moment of just the purity of the words, right? Because there's no advantage. Nobody has an advantage. You got a page, I got a page. I've been writing for 20 years. You haven't? Let's go.
Awesome. That's some great advice. So our next question comes from Sean Joseph, and he wants to know if you guys can talk a little bit about getting a job in LA from outside of LA. Maybe Jim and Sam talk a little bit about how you got from Minneapolis to LA. If you got any advice there.
We did. We did. I forgot.
A friend of a friend of a friend, right? Is how that often works. It's how it worked for us. We had a good friend of Sam's in particular, of both of ours, had a writer friend out here who got a development deal that came with an assistantship, and she didn't really need an assistant. So she offered it to us because she knew she'd offered encouraging advice on our work and offered us the gig because it was kind of a low risk for her. She didn't really expect to need anyone to step up and do much in the job.
But that's how we got it, and we came out. And just so we're clear, we were ready to be broke because we were splitting an assistant job and making no money, really, sponging off of our wives. I don't know if, Ben, you were trying to do that too. I don't know how that worked, but it is handy to have a working wife or husband. But the most important thing, I think, is that you have to be willing. Well, I got two things. One guy, someone told me this, which was get a phone that has a 310 or 323 or 213 area code. Nobody knows you don't live here. So, because they're not going to want you to fly out for a job interview. They're just not going to, because then there's too much pressure on them. Oh, now I got to see them, and I don't want to give them the job, and it's all that. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to give you a job by not knowing. And with your email and your phone, they don't know where you are.
Well, I would say that's probably true with even phone numbers these days, because people move out here from whatever, and they've brought their number with them.
That's true too.
Know.
So it's that idea. But it is hard. I don't want to say it's not hard. It's hard for those because now also, Ben, you can speak to this. You know how hard it is, and we're also sympathetic to people trying to do it. That I know we bend over backwards for that, right?
This is the thing. Everybody, all the writers, anybody in the writing, it's such a tough world to be in, and it's tough world to break into. So, in my experience, the majority of writers who have careers are sympathetic to people trying to break in. So you got to reach out, and you're going to get a surprising response if you reach out with sincerity and not too needy. But I've been mentoring some writers who have not been in a position to move to LA yet. One of the things that's been working well for them is, number one, you got to write good scripts. You have to be working on your craft.
There's no point in being here if you don't have your script that you can show people to actually land a job, right?
Yep. And people are not going to be cool. Like, you only get one chance to to have somebody read you. If they're going to read you and they don't love you, all they got to do is see promise in the script. They could give you encouragement. But if they feel like you aren't working and serious about your craft, that's the last time they're going to listen to you. The other good thing about writing on your craft is you can start to generate momentum from outside of LA by entering it into fellowships, entering it into competitions. If you end up establishing correspondence with somebody like me, and then you send me an email 3 months later saying, hey, it was just giving you a quick update. I finished in the semifinals of such and such script contest and whatever. All that stuff is just seeding. And one of the other things these people do, like they keep that correspondence up, but don't come across as needy. And one of the other things they do is they then, of the people that they have established some sort of rapport with, they say, I'm going to be in LA for a week, right? Because you might not be able to move here, but you could probably come for a week. And you try to have some sort of I know it's different during a pandemic, but eventually you want to try to have some sort of real connection with these people over coffee or over drinks or whatever it might be. And then you continue to build that. Eventually you'll have a network in there. So when you are ready to move to LA, you'll have much more solid footing when you get there.
And that worked for you, Ben. You have a story of success with that with Mike. Mike was through a friend who came in and you had coffee with him, right? Who?
Kesselin.
Yeah, Kesselin. And then you had coffee with him. And then it was just
a bunch of men and women I've done that with. I have some that haven't moved here yet, have already gotten repped, and one has gotten staffed and they're moving, but they didn't, they didn't have to in order to start to build a network and build some momentum.
And now with BlueJeans, unsubtle drop, but really with the virtual conversations and rooms in our comfort level now, that's changed everything. Because now, if you're like, hey, I don't live here, but could we talk for 30 minutes or something? And I'm like, yeah, I don't have to get out of my house, and we can, I'll talk to you, because that's the way to do it. Just obey the golden rule, which is never, ever, ever attach your script to an email unless I ask you to.
That's right.
So someone does that, man, I'm just like, oh, you just.
Yeah, it's like, how do I disinfect my hard drive? I don't want anything to do with your intellectual property.
Yeah, it also is presumptuous, and you're saying, hey, we just met, or we haven't met. Would you mind sitting down and reading my script for an hour or two? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
It's a big ask.
It's a big ask.
Yeah, there's an old spy trick. They literally train spies when you're infiltrating a network. Never ask for anything. Get into the group and then start offering things. And I used that when I was trying to get people to pay attention to me in writing. So I used to do stuff like I'd be in a situation where I establish a rapport with somebody. I hope they'll read me someday or give me a shot someday. But my email to them wouldn't be like, oh, man, I'm working on this great idea. I got this great thing. Or all my friends are telling me this script is great, and I'd love to have a pro, sort of give me feet. I don't do that. I would be like, I had a conversation with them, or online I realized they were Dodgers fans, and I would buy like good Dodgers tickets, and then I'd email them and say, hey, man, I had these great seats for the Dodgers, but I can't make the game. Let me know if you want the thing, right? So to them, they're going to sit there.
This is why Ben is so successful in Hollywood. You are better than anyone I know.
This is half actor. Now it's probably down to 10%
it's
now,
amazing.
but still, yeah.
But there's a smaller version of that too, guys. You know how it is. Like, you've done this a million times. You had a conversation with somebody and they mentioned how they were interested in dinosaurs. And then you see a cool article that's kind of obscure, in the vein of some specific they mentioned. And instead of calling them or emailing them saying, hey, I'm still struggling, you email them and say, I remember our conversation. Here's a link to a great article I just saw. Or did you hear about this book that's about to come out? And then every time they think of you, they're thinking about this person who brightens their day.
Mm-hmm. We're not smart enough to do that, Ben, but I thank you for thinking that we would have done that.
Yeah, we've never brightened anyone's day as far as I know, but I'm glad it worked for you.
Yeah, that's really good. What up, JR? Is that it, or we got more?
No, we got more questions if you guys are still good.
All right.
All right.
Ben has a job to get to, but go ahead. Yeah.
Let's do.
I have a hard hour of 11 p.m.
That sounds good. I'll respect that. So our next question comes from Jeff, I believe. and it's why do you think there aren't more writers who make the jump from comic book writing to scripts? And do you think comic book writing is a valid way to work on a TV career?
Great question. You know what? I'm telling you right now, like that's the next trend. I'm already seeing it. And first of all, to answer the first part, it's like, who does Hollywood take seriously? So it used
anybody who's not a writer in Hollywood already.
That's right. And it's like, I mean, but if you're a playwright, like you're getting more traction now, right? Or you know, it's like, oh, they're a playwright. And it used to be when I was first in rooms, we would get submissions from people who were transitioning from the theater world, and we'd be like, nope, never. They're too wordy. They're too whatever. I didn't, not me, by the way, but people I was in the room with. They said, we don't really want to deal with playwrights. But now, playwrights, everybody's seeing that as a good thing, actually. It actually is great to have on your resume. And I'm starting to see the same trend with comic books. It was like nobody's taking them seriously. Nobody's saying that that's real storytelling. Nobody's saying that that could easily apply to what we do. And that used to be the attitude. But now I'm starting to see people be like, wait a minute. You see how much comic books and graphic novel adaptations are starting to dominate what is being generated, not just in features, but through television. And then you start thinking about the people who, there's some key examples of people who have made the transition. So now all of a sudden, smart people in Hollywood are being like, oh shit, let's tap it. So that's the new oil well.
And there's no question that comic books have a lot of respect in Hollywood now. You know, obviously we're Marvel we were Marvel writers for a while, and you know, it's just total respect. Look at, you know, WandaVision, huge, very complicated show. Yeah, in the books, I don't know if anybody read the books, but there it is.
And you're also, you know, in that format, you're writing to an image, which is really like the difference in myself that I see. The thing I had to unlearn was not writing novels on the page, right? Where like, you know, you've got a 4-inch chunk of description of all about
He's
the room
working
and what's
on that,
going
by
on.
the way.
When none of that's going to wind up on screen, right? Like
that's and people are but we still go back to this one thing. Whether you're a playwright or you write comic books or whether you're coming from copywriting and advertising, whatever it might be, like eventually you gotta have a script. You know, you could have a short story that won a Pulitzer, but if you don't have a script that convinces us that you can also write in this format, then it's a problem. You could be the most decorated comic book writer, but if we don't feel like you've taken the time to get to know this format, this medium, then we're probably not gonna engage, because we're thinking even if you're extremely talented, it's going to take more time than we have to get you the other piece. So get that script with it.
As a staff writer, the home run with the staff writer is someone that is not only good in the room, with any writer really, but also does something on the page. And with a staff writer, it's not only does something on the page with that voice that Ben was talking about, but also it's I know how to get in and out of a scene. You know, I'm not going to give you a scene where I'm going to basically put a big line through the first page of that scene because it was all just working up to the scene, and then I'm like, oh, there it is, and then we can just get rid of that.
Everybody said hello and good morning and what they want in their coffee, but I still don't know nothing's happening. Right?
So, I mean, those are fundamentals that, you know, we all had to learn. And then, and so if you're past that already, which you won't be necessarily as a writer in another genre, because I don't know how it works in every genre, but TV every scene starts pretty hot and stays hot. And so to a point, even if it's just emotional, but it's going to start going. Why are you laughing, Ben?
I was just thinking about
some bullshit.
The first script I wrote where the dude was like, oh, I could tell an actor wrote it. And one of the things was my climax of the whole thing was like, there was an argument in the thing, and there was like a confrontation on a basketball court, and I was like, and it ends with a heated argument. That was the end of the whole movie. And the guy's like, can somebody pull a gun out or something? Like, can we? And I was like, it's a heated argument. And I was like, no, that's not gonna.
Because it's big night. Everybody wants to write big night. We just end with a quiet scene of one brother making the other brother breakfast. And scene. And you're like, that is a beautiful moment that you cannot do in your first. Well, maybe you could do it in a script, but there's a lot of arguing before that, and some guns, as I recall.
Yeah.
All right, JR.
All right, so our next one is another question about adaptation. This comes from Cynthia, and she asks, if you were an author of a novel, is it best to write your own script or better to work with a screenwriter and put off being a showrunner till later? I think she's asking, if you write a novel, do you give it to somebody else to adapt, or do you try to adapt it yourself and do the whole thing yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Yeah, what's the goal, right?
Yeah, if you just want to be involved because it was your baby, and you don't have a long-term goal of like writing television or even just like having that be part of your rapport. I mean, what's not rapport? What do you call that when you have a group of things you do?
Repertoire.
Yeah, I mean repertoire. There you go. See, this is what we do in the room too.
What's the word?
And like, what's that word?
Solipsism.
And that's not intended to be part of repertoire. If it's just a one-off, then you should write the script and hope it's good. But if you're intending for that to be part of your repertoire, then what and you have a book, then it should be all about like, I would really like to be involved with this. In some cases, you need to have a sample in order for people to take you seriously. In other cases, you are at the whim of whoever is going to develop it. And a lot of us would be like, great, if you're sincere about being involved, let's do it. But if you're not, then you got to be willing to give that thing away.
Well, and this is what we're talking about in the last question too, right? There's because there's the craft of screenwriting. Storytelling is one thing, and you have to be a storyteller to write television or do any of these other kinds of writing. But then there's the very specific craft that goes into TV, that goes into how you get in and out of the scenes, and do you call out the low angle shot coming in, and all of that stuff that you just have to learn in order to do a competent script.
Yep.
Yeah, I just made a deal. We just optioned a pretty high profile book that it hasn't been announced yet, but we got the rights to the book, and the author demanded a meeting, a person-person meeting, which was great because I wanted to talk to him anyway. But in the conversation, that was one of the things I talked about. What do you want out of this? And they were very upfront and said they don't want to be writing. They don't want to be in the room. They don't want to co-write the pilot, none of that. But they do want to be very closely involved in terms of being a consultant, like being able to make sure that what they feel is the heart of the story is preserved. They're okay with a lot of changes, but they just want to make sure the heart of the story is preserved. Then 6 months ago, I had a conversation with a writer, and they were like, I want to co-write. And I didn't do that deal because of other reasons, but they got into a deal. They had a book that had some buzz, and they got into a deal where they were paired with a showrunner that's going to co-write with them.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, we've got one more question, and this comes from Fausto. And he says, earlier Jim and Sam discussed that you shouldn't try to tell stories that have already been told, yet I've heard that writers need to write what they know. What techniques do you recommend to help aspiring writers write something new?
Well, nobody knows exactly what you know, right? Like
nobody does.
I mean, because that's part of it. Is there's a generic quality to writing where you can tell a generic story about generic people, or you dig into, well, wait a minute, let's talk about the art dealer instead of the detective who's going in doing steps of a detective story that I've seen 100 times. What's the unusual way into the story? And because, you were an art dealer or your parents were art dealers and you know about that world, suddenly you're telling me something that only you know in a way that's exposing story I would never think to look for.
Because of the specificity.
Specificity
is the difference,
yeah.
Right? And the thing is, it's a trick question. And Ben, I'm curious to hear what you say about it, but it's a trick question because we're telling universal stories, right? But they have to be specific and unique and universal.
Well, the emotion is universal, right? And identifiable.
Right.
It's easy though. I mean, and don't take if you're interpreting that like that literally, like don't tell stories you know, then you gotta take a step back. Cause what we're talking about is like your stories are houses, bro. I mean, they're all houses. They have rooms, they have bathrooms, they have doors, that's right. That. So, but you can go into any house, even houses that are right next to each other, and have a completely different feeling. Completely different. It could be, and you could be in one of those places where it's tract housing and they're literally the same floor plan. and yet completely different. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about, oh, hey, we've heard every story 100 times and some stories 1,000,000 times. The ones that you've heard 1,000,000 times, you better have something in there that surprises me. And even the ones that you have 100 times, what's different? Oh, there's going to be a story about a reformed assassin. Okay, I've seen that before. Okay, but he wants to be an actor. He takes acting classes. Oh, you got my attention. It's just that easy. What can you do to make yours different? And that's where you start to also then tap into what's special and unique about you, because you're going to be drawn to something different than me. And then even how you execute it is going to be unique to you. And then that becomes special.
And hopefully, like in the case of Barry, which is what he's talking about, it's because you're an actor, not because you're an assassin, that you have a way into that story.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I think that's it, Ben. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today, man.
It was a pleasure. Hey, it's an honor always to be in the room with you guys. Always a good time. Also, I don't want to leave without acknowledging, not to bring it down at all, but everything that's going down in Atlanta and those murders. I encourage everybody to be active and involved in doing things that help make this world a better place. Your community, your city, your household, whatever it is, like try to do something that's going to make it better for everybody so we can all be safe and happy, so that we can create really twisted ass stories.
Amen to all of that. All right. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. We'll see you soon.
With it. Thank you.
All right, everybody. That is all the time we have today, and I want to give a huge, huge thank you to Ben. I learned so much, just personally. It was awesome. All right, everybody. You can get more of Sam and Jim on the Writers Room with Sam and Jim, our podcast, and that's available wherever you get podcasts. If you've got a story you'd like to workshop in a Writers Room setting, reach out to us on Twitter or Instagram. And thanks again to BlueJeans by Verizon for sponsoring this booth. Make sure to check them out at South by Southwest on the online platform. And they're going to be giving away an ATEM mini switcher from Blackmagic, so enter to win that. And if you enjoyed this podcast, tell a friend so they can get me paid. Thanks, everyone. Bye.